Okay, so we're diving into a topic today that I know a lot of you have asked about, dark psychology.
Yeah,
And
so
it can be a little bit,
little
a little
unsettling.
unsettling. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
we're going to get into the nitty gritty of, like, how people can,
It's a good workout. Think of it like a workout for your mind.
yes,
Like, self-defense, but for your mind.
exactly.
Yeah.
Mental self-defense. So dark psychology, not like an official psych term, right?
Right.
It's more of a catch-all term.
Yeah, it's an umbrella term.
For all those tactics that people use to
Yeah.
kind of get their way, to sway
Influence.
people, yeah. And the article that we're looking at today, it's called Dark Psychology, 12 Techniques for Manipulation and Mind Control. It gets right to it.
Yeah.
We're messing around.
It does. It gets right to it. And it
Yeah.
uses all these real-world examples, which is what I like about it.
Yeah, I mean,
Because then it's like, okay, this is not just...
it's relatable.
It's relatable. This is not just,
It's not just for, spy movies.
Spy movies. Exactly. Yeah. It's like, oh, I've totally
Yeah.
been in that situation.
Huh.
So this deep dive, what we're doing here, it's really all about like equipping you with the knowledge to be able to spot these things as they're happening, hopefully,
Yeah, that awareness is key, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's your first line of defense.
Yes. Yes, that's so true. Okay, so the article, it kicks off with these techniques that they say are like surprisingly common.
Things you probably encounter every day
Mm-hmm.
and don't even realize it.
Yeah, yeah. They fly under the radar because they can be very subtle.
Okay, so that's even more.
And they can even be unintentional.
Oh, interesting.
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay, so it's not always like with malicious intent.
Right. Exactly. Doesn't mean it's not effective.
Right. But it is still, it's still manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're talking about things like manipulative negotiation,
Mm-hmm.
guilt tripping, which, oh my gosh, I feel like that's, we all know, we all know someone, yeah.
Yeah.
And then social scalping, which I will admit that term was new to me, but when I read the examples, I was like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I know people who do that.
Yeah, yeah. It's good to put a name to it, though, right?
It is good to put a name to it because then you can,
Yeah.
call it out. So let's unpack these a little bit. Let's start with manipulative negotiation.
Okay.
The example that they use in the article is like the salesperson who just will not take no for an answer.
Right.
Like you've said no 10 times and they're still, going. What is the psychology there?
Well, I mean, at its core, manipulative negotiation is about getting what you want.
Mm.
Even if it means, bending the rules a little bit or exploiting someone's, emotions.
Mhm.
And so that pushy salesperson, they might be, tapping into your desire to be liked, maybe your like fear of confrontation.
Like they can sense your hesitation and they just
Exactly.
go for it.
Yeah. And that's why, recognizing the tactic is so important
Yeah.
because once you see it for what it is, you can, regain your footing.
Right.
You can set those boundaries.
Yes, you have to sometimes call it out or just be like, no, I said no,
Exactly.
stop.
Exactly. Yeah.
So guilt tripping. Okay, so I feel like everyone has that one friend or family member who is just like the master.
But it's so common.
Oh, yeah.
It's so common.
Yeah.
And it's so effective.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Why is so effective?
Well, it really weaponizes our sense of empathy, right?
Mhm.
And our, we're kind of conditioned to want to help people, to want to, relieve their suffering and
I feel guilty.
not feel guilty. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to notice how like the guilt trip often centers around the manipulator's needs and their feelings.
Interesting.
Not yours.
So it's not actually about helping you
Yeah.
or it's really about them getting what they want.
It's about them.
Yeah.
It's about their emotions. It's like they're holding their emotions hostage and making you responsible
Oh,
for rescuing them.
that's a really good way to put it. Yeah,
Yeah.
rescuing them from their own emotions. And that's why it's so hard, right?
Right. Exactly.
Because if you're an empathetic person, you feel bad.
Of course. Yeah. And that's why I think it's so important to, learn how to separate your emotions
Yeah.
from the situation
All right.
and ask yourself, like, am I genuinely in the wrong here?
Oh, that's a good one.
Or am I being manipulated?
That's a good question to ask yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. So the third one in this trifecta
Yes.
of everyday
Everyday manipulation.
social scalping.
Yes.
So the example that I was reading here is that person who's constantly reminding you
Oh, yeah.
of every little thing,
Every little favor.
every A little.
Remember that time I did that thing for you?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes, I know. I know exactly. I know that person.
The scorekeeper.
Ugh, the scorekeeper. What is that about?
So this tactic is really, it's playing on our, very human innate instinct for reciprocity.
Okay.
We're kind of hardwired to feel obligated when someone does something for us.
Right. You want to like return the favor.
Exactly, even if it's unsolicited.
Right. Oh.
Right. So they're doing that, and they're racking up points, basically.
So it's like they're playing a game.
It is. It's a game.
Okay.
And it's a game that you might not even know you're playing.
And the rules are different for them than they are for...
Exactly.
Okay.
And they're keeping score, you're not.
Oh, wow. That's a really good way to put it. Okay, so they're racking up social credits
Yes.
to cash in later.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Right. And it creates this, like, unspoken pressure to reciprocate, even if you don't feel like you owe them anything.
Right. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So being able to spot these patterns, that's...
Yeah, awareness.
Okay.
Awareness is key. As we said, like, it's your first line of defense. The more you can recognize these patterns, the better you can, protect yourself from being exploited.
Love it. Okay.
When you think about it, it's kind of interesting how these tendencies, these kind of manipulative tendencies, often become, like, amplified in the dating world.
Oh, for sure.
You know?
Like maybe because the stakes are higher or something?
Yeah, maybe there's something to that.
Yeah.
The kind of, like, the dynamics of attraction and connection, I think,
Right.
can make us particularly vulnerable
Yeah. Yeah.
to
That's right.
these tactics.
Okay, so the article then goes into this whole section on, like, dark psychology and dating,
Mm-hmm.
which, I mean,
It gets juicy,
yeah, it gets a little juicy, and it's like,
a little uncomfortable.
yeah, and also a little bit like, oh no,
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
seen that before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
So, so they get into things like deceptive commitment, chameleon manipulation, which that one's a mouthful.
that's a mouthful.
And then, of course, like, playing hard to get, which is like...
The classic. The classic. We all know about that one.
Right, and I think what I find really interesting about these dating tactics is that they often, I think, really do come from a place of insecurity.
Really?
Yeah, like a deep-seated need for approval,
Okay, so it's not always as, like,
Right.
Machiavellian as it seems on the surface.
Right, exactly. It's not always, this calculated, like,
Right.
evil plan. Right. Often it's coming from this place of, like, I need to do these things because I'm afraid of being hurt, or I'm afraid of being rejected. Okay, so let's unpack some of these dating games, I guess we could call them.
Yeah.
Okay, so deceptive commitment, the example they use in the article is like the person who's always talking about the future,
Mm-hmm.
but like never actually wants to like make any concrete plans.
Right. Always dangling that carrot, but never letting you quite reach it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like what's the psychology there?
Well, I think in some cases it might be, a genuine fear of commitment, right? Like some people really do have a hard time with intimacy, with emotional intimacy. But it can also be, a way of keeping someone hooked without having to fully, like, invest in the relationship.
Right. So they're getting, like, the emotional validation, I guess. But they're not actually having to, like, put in the work
Exactly.
of a real relationship.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important to, again, kind of go back to that idea of, like, actions speak louder than words.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
If someone is constantly making promises that they don't keep, that's a red flag. Pay attention to those behaviors.
Yeah, because talk is cheap.
Exactly.
Like, they can say whatever they want,
right.
But if they're not backing it up, it's like, okay, what's really going on here?
Exactly.
Okay, chameleon manipulation. This one, when I read this one, I was like, oh,
It's a little creepy.
It's a little creepy.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's almost like they can sense what you want, and then they become that.
Yeah, they're like morphing into whoever they think you want them to be.
Yes. Like, how do they even do that? Like, what's going on there?
Well, I think, again, it goes back to this idea of insecurity, right?
Okay.
Like a deep-seated need for approval. They might believe, on some level, that the only way to be loved is to become a mirror
Oh, wow.
of what they think the other person desires.
So it's not even necessarily that they're like consciously trying to like deceive you.
Right.
It's more like they're trying to protect themselves.
It could be, yeah. It could be that they are, so afraid of rejection
Right.
that they're willing to kind of like contort themselves into
into whatever they think you want.
Exactly. Which, I mean,
that's not a recipe for a healthy relationship. No, because then it becomes like inauthentic.
Right.
And then how can you build something real?
Exactly.
On top of that?
Yeah, because eventually that facade is going to, crumble.
Right.
It can't be maintained indefinitely, and then you're left with like, okay, who are you really?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, that one's a little scary.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the classic playing hard to get, which this one always feels a little bit more like
intentional.
Yeah. Like this one's like a strategy.
Yeah. I mean, it can be unconscious, right?
Yeah.
But I think often it is a deliberate strategy to, kind of try to increase one's perceived value.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So if I appear less available, then you're going to want me more.
Oh, it's like supply and demand.
Okay, exactly.
Yeah, make yourself seem more scarce.
Right, and it plays on that, that very fundamental human desire, right?
Yeah.
We want what we can't have.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Right, so the less available someone is, the more we tend to kind of...
Yeah, we put them on a pedestal.
Exactly. And I think, one of the dangers with playing hard to get is that it can create a really unhealthy power dynamic.
Oh, okay.
In relationships, right, where one person is always chasing.
Oh, yeah.
And the other person is always kind of,
in control.
In control, exactly. And
that's a recipe for like codependency and all that stuff.
Exactly. And resentment.
Resentment, yes. Oh, all the bad things.
Yeah, all the ingredients for a not so great relationship.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about, how these techniques can show up in our personal relationships, our dating lives. But this is where the article, it takes a little bit of a turn, and it gets into how these patterns can emerge on like a much larger scale,
right,
and start to influence like groups and even like societies as a whole. So it's like we've been talking about how dark psychology, these techniques, they can show up in our own lives, our relationship, like on a personal level. But this next part of the article, it kind of zooms out a little bit, and it gets into how this stuff can actually play out on a much bigger scale and influence like groups,
right,
communities, even whole societies.
Yeah. The stakes get a lot higher, right? We were talking about influencing not just individuals, but like entire communities.
Right, exactly. And it can be a little bit, unsettling.
Oh, absolutely.
To think about.
Yeah.
So they focus on two main tactics: amplifying problems and suppressing dissent.
Right.
And the examples that they give in the article are like, they talk about cults, they talk about manipulative leaders, echo chambers online, which I thought was really interesting.
Nice, yeah.
Because that's so like relevant today,
Absolutely.
So how does this work? Like, how does amplifying problems, how does that play into this idea of like manipulating entire groups?
Well, imagine like you've got a group, right? And you've got a leader, someone who's in a position of power, and they start exaggerating a problem, right? They blow it up, they make it seem far worse than it actually is.
Okay.
And this creates this climate of fear and uncertainty.
Makes sense.
And then people start looking for answers. They start looking for someone to provide safety.
Okay, so they're creating the problem, and then they're going to come in with the solution.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. They position themselves as the savior, right?
Yeah.
The only one who can guide the group through this crisis.
That is good. That's clever.
Right. And because people are afraid, they're more likely to accept like extreme solutions.
Right. You're not thinking clearly when you're scared. Right.
Exactly. You're not thinking as critically, and so you're more likely to kind of go along with something.
Right.
Even if maybe deep down it compromises your values a little bit.
Right, because you just want that comfort, that like...
Yeah, you just want the safety.
The safety, the security.
Yep.
Okay, so then suppressing dissent, that goes hand in hand with this.
Absolutely. Once the leader has established their authority, right, they can't have anyone questioning their narrative.
Right, questioning their power.
Exactly. So any dissenting voices, any criticism, any alternative perspectives, that's got to be silenced.
Right. So you start to see things like censorship and just like that pressure to conform.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sometimes it's overt, sometimes it's very subtle. Right. But it creates this environment where people are afraid to speak up.
Right.
Even when they know maybe something's wrong.
Yeah. They don't want to rock the boat.
Right.
They don't want to be like the odd one out.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So with all this talk about like manipulation and it's happening, in our own lives, it's happening on this bigger level. It's easy to feel like kind of powerless, like, what do we even do? But the good news is this article does not just leave us with that.
It gives us tools.
It gives us tools.
Yeah.
Right. It gives us ways to like protect ourselves and counter these dark psychology techniques.
Yeah. And I think, that's what we've been talking about. Like, awareness is that first step.
Awareness is huge.
Right. Once you understand the tactics, you're in a much better position to...
Right. You can spot it.
Spot it, exactly, and protect yourself.
Okay. So they talk about things like staying informed, practicing critical thinking, which we've touched on.
Yes.
Setting boundaries, which huge.
Super important.
Communicating openly.
Yeah.
And seeking support when you need it.
Yes.
Which all like incredibly important. But if you had to pick one thing, like if our listeners could just take away one thing today, what would you say is like the most important tool in the toolbox?
I think it's really simple, but it's trusting your gut.
Okay.
If something feels off about a person, about a situation, if something seems too good to be true,
right,
or if you feel pressured to conform in a way that doesn't feel right, pay attention to that. That's your intuition trying to tell you something.
That's such a good point, because I think, especially as like, adults in the world, we're so used to
like overriding
it. Yeah. You're like, oh, I'm just being silly or, whatever. But no, our bodies, like we have these instincts for a reason, right?
Absolutely. They're there to protect us.
Yeah. Okay. Good reminder.
Yeah.
Trust your gut.
Yeah.
Okay. So bottom line, I think what we've kind of, uncovered today is that dark psychology is real.
It's real.
It's out there.
It's out there. Yeah.
It's in our lives. It's in our relationships. It's in the bigger picture as well. But it doesn't mean that we're like, doomed. It doesn't mean that we're like gonna fall prey to it.
Right.
We just have to be aware of it.
Exactly. Knowledge is power.
I love that. Knowledge is power. It's so true. So thank you. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us.
Thank you for having me.
This has been so insightful. And to all of you listening, keep your eyes open, keep your ears open.
Stay curious.
Yes, stay curious. I love that. And remember, I think, like we said, the best defense against this stuff is just knowing that it exists.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Until next time.